Psalm 40. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. Good morning, Faith family. We get to hear a special story this morning of my friend CJ. She and Todd have been part of this church since last year, and we've gotten to know each other recently. And you even wrote a book about your story. And this morning you're going to give just a little bit about what your life is and what God has done in your life. And I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and I just want you to share with me and with the family here what God has done in your life. So, CJ, would you describe your life growing up?
Growing up as a kid was a time in my life that I was extremely fearful, untrusting, learned to become I called myself compliant Carla, because anything anybody told me to do, I would do it because that kept peace in the family and it made life a tad bit easier for me. There was a lot of darkness. My father was connected with some ritualistic satanic groups, which he brought into the home as well.
So you learned to try to make peace as a child, but there wasn't peace.
There was never any peace in our home. I was afraid all the time. Outside my father being very abusive, my mother was a very compliant, dutiful wife. I believe she loved us, but she was very compliant. So she chose to look past some things that she probably needed to address.
So you had this really unique and really hard upbringing, and you're welcome to share more one-on-one with people in this body who might ask you. Let me ask you, how did you see yourself then?
Myself, I hated myself. I thought I was unworthy. I didn't think I had any value. Fearful all the time. I learned at a very, very early age to only trust me. I would trust me. I wasn't going to trust anybody else. I would take care of things. I would make sure things got done. I would make sure that if someone told me to do something, that I did it, and I did it very, very well. I thought I was responsible for everything. If my mother was upset, I would always go to her and ask her if do you love me? I'm sorry, what did I do? And she would always tell me, no, it's not your fault. But then she'd go 3 days with being silent. So I always felt the thing. So silence to me is a very damaging thing. It's even today, a lot of silence really bothers me.
So you had this really unique and hard childhood in Wisconsin and Illinois, kind of back and forth a little bit. When did God make himself known to you, CJ?
Well, my mom always took us to church, which was
strange.
That was very strange.
Whoa,
it was talk about double standards. Go to church on Sunday and kind of live a life not so great. From the outside, we looked like we were the perfect family. On the inside, not so much. So I'd heard about God growing up, and then we moved to Illinois when I was 13, and we went to this little church in Paynes Point. But the pastor talked about, behold, I stand at the door and knock, verse. And I remember as 13 going, well, if Jesus knocked on my door, I'd open it up and let him in. I mean, that's just how simple-minded I was. And then when I was 15, someone invited me to this place called the Soul Hole. The Soul Hole was put on by the Evangelical Free Church in Mount Morris, Illinois, and it was a little Christian coffee house. Underneath the shoe store, Hongs and Myers owned the shoe store, and they went to the church. And every Friday and Saturday, they would have music and food, which are two great things for youth. Food and music.
Sure, and we do it here in church.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sometime during the night, they would come out. They would share Christ, and they shared the 4 spiritual laws. And so, a week before my 16th birthday, I accepted Christ.
So, did everything change?
For a short time, I got involved in the youth group in Mount Morris, and Meryl and Larry Stevens ran this youth group every week, and so I was being fed. And then some things happened when I hit my senior year. My father died. That changed a lot of things. And then Todd and I met, and he asked me to marry him, and we got married. And that is about the time I walked away. And then then life really started changing.
And you had some episodes, some really rough episodes, and I read in your book in your 20s and 30s and 40s maybe. And
When I was in 1985, so that would have made me 29 years old, I found myself in places I didn't know how I got there. I didn't know anybody there. I'm a police officer, and I'm going through all this stuff that I was keeping very, very well hidden. And my sergeant came up to me and started talking about things and that, and he connected me to Stu Nelson, who was the police chaplain at the time. And one day I found myself sitting in my bedroom floor with my service weapon in my lap, and I was going to pull the trigger, plain and simple. I was done with life. I had sent both of my children off to the pool. It never occurred to me what they would find when they got home. It never, because when you're that depressed and you want to end life, all you really want to do is end the pain. And I
so you
wanted
were
to
in
end
the
the pain.
miry clay. You were at the bottom.
At the bottom.
And God lifted you out. He put something new in your heart.
He certainly did. Stu started connecting me, getting me busy doing some things so I would have some self-worth. I got connected to some very, very wonderful Christian counselors. I had fabulous pastors. But I was still doing a lot of cutting, self-mutilation, horrendous things. And that had to be addressed. So I ended up in hospital because when you do that kind of stuff, you end up in hospital. And one by one, the pieces started coming out.
So you have truly an amazing story of God's grace, and I wish we had 10 or 20 or 30 minutes. Let me finish with this question. How do you see yourself now that God has gained more and more victory and power in your life, and you said, yes, Lord? How do you see yourself now, Giese?
Well, I don't look at myself as me. I look at myself as how God sees me. This was one of the first verses that popped off the page for me. It's in Deuteronomy 7. And this is the verse that God showed me so much about me. He said, "For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord God has chosen you out of all the peoples on the face of the earth to be his people, his treasured possession. The Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples." I know this was written to Israel, but I felt like I was the fewest of all people. And when I realized that God chose me before the earth was laid out, and a treasured possession. And I started thinking about what we do with our treasured possessions and how we protect them and we seal them and we take care of them. And I was like, you think that about me, God? Wow. So that was the start of it. But then he showed me for every lie that I believed, and I believed a lot of them, for every lie I believed, he had something here in this book for me that went against the lie. God took the most vilest part of me and he turned it into something beautiful. And
I love hearing your story because it's God's story, what he has done in drawing CJ in, and here you are today, beautiful and lovely in God's sight. And I know you'd be open to conversations with people in the
absolutely.
body, and yet that makes you nervous. So there'll be more. Thank you so much for sharing
May I
this.
add one thing? Just
Add
one
one
thing.
thing.
I wrote this down because I think we all do this. My wounds and scars were hidden by the face that I wore at the time. But Jesus' scars go much, much deeper. And because of the cross, because of the blood of Christ, because of the wounds on his hands, the wounds and scars on his hands and feet, my wounds and scars were healed. And he does that for everyone. Everyone needs to know their story doesn't need to be my story. Their story is their story. It matters not where you're at, but everybody needs Christ in their life. Everybody needs his forgiveness.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.